My former boyfriend thought he'd parade his affluent fiancée at their wedding, aiming to flaunt his elevated status. Yet, my chosen guest masterfully flipped the script in a truly unforeseen manner. Dylan, 30, and I, 22, initially connected during our part-time shifts at Starbucks. I was a college student then, diligently accruing funds to secure my own place, while he wrestled with student loan repayments. His parents, burdened by gambling debts, were unable to offer financial aid. Our early conversations revolved around our respective family struggles, but we soon discovered a genuine mutual enjoyment in each other's company. 2 years post-graduation, I had amassed sufficient savings to live independently. Dylan, however, remained ensnared by his student debt, unable to escape his parents' home. I extended an invitation for him to move in with me, but his financial constraints meant he couldn't even cover his portion of the rent. Deciding to absorb 80% of the total, leaving him responsible for only 20%, he readily assented. Beyond rent, we evenly divided utility expenses. Though our jobs differed, his demanding long hours on site, mine a more flexible corporate role that permitted working from home so long as targets were met, Dylan's schedule frequently precluded him from assisting with household chores. Consequently, I managed all the dishes, laundry, cleaning, and cooking. I didn't mind, understanding the rigor of his work. Still, I specifically asked him to handle the trash, given he was always the last to eat. Invariably, he'd forget, leaving me to deal with it each morning. I recall a weekend when I returned from work to find our entire living space in utter chaos. The kitchen counter was a disaster of overflowing dishes, empty food packaging, and chocolate wrappers. Laundry had piled up, and the trash remained unemptied. My frustration mounted. After a demanding workday, all I craved was rest, but the disarray made it impossible. I dedicated the entire day to tidying, silently hoping Dylan would notice and appreciate my efforts. When he finally arrived, he embraced me, expressing how much he'd missed me, yet seemed utterly oblivious to the pristine state of the apartment. He immediately settled down to watch his game, leaving me feeling overlooked and exasperated. Tears welled up. Whether it was exhaustion, lack of sleep, or his profound indifference, I suddenly grasped how little he truly valued me. He glanced over, asking if something was amiss, but I shook my head, feigning normalcy, and declared myself ready for bed. Before drifting off, I reiterated the request to take out the trash. He nodded. Unsurprisingly, the next morning, the trash was still there. My patience snapped when he appeared in the kitchen asking for breakfast. I retorted that he could prepare his own meal. He accused me of rudeness, and I erupted, lambasting his uselessness around the house. He blinked, as if genuinely confused by my outburst, and told me not to be so dramatic. Taking a deep breath, I questioned why he consistently neglected the trash. He mumbled about forgetting. I then pressed him on what contributions he made to our home beyond arriving, beer in hand, and parking himself in front of the television. He began to explain his fatigue after work and his need for personal time. I acknowledged his need for relaxation, but countered, "What about me?" I reminded him that after my workday, I returned home to cook for us both, clean, do laundry, iron his shirts for the week, and my sole expectation was for him to manage the trash. Dylan then retorted that he'd never asked me to perform any of these tasks. He continued, stating his job was demanding and that as his girlfriend, I should understand and assist him. He even attempted to justify his stance by claiming these chores were insignificant, just as his mother had done for his father. This infuriated me. I realized that despite my tireless work around the house, I was allowing him to exploit me, even though we weren't married. I met his gaze and declared I would no longer do anything to assist him around the house. I was not his mother. We were equals. He needed to cook his own food, do his laundry, iron his shirts, take out his garbage, and clean up after himself. Dylan's eyes widened in protest, but I raised a hand to silence him. I added there was more. He would also pay 50% of the rent, or he would need to vacate. Dylan was aghast, demanding to know the source of this sudden ultimatum. I stated my weariness of laboring for him without feeling any appreciation. He clearly wanted to argue further, but I left the house, running late for work. This was my first time establishing such firm boundaries, yet I felt no guilt. I honored my word, only cleaning up after myself. It was gratifying to witness him scramble for clean clothes or struggle to iron his shirts before work. He refused to clean dishes or take out his trash, undoubtedly hoping I'd eventually relent. I didn't, even when the dishes began to accumulate and reek. I opted for takeout, easily discarding my own waste without entering the kitchen. He repeatedly tried to engage me, insisting I should be a good partner and care for him, but I remained resolute. When rent was due, I paid my 50% to our landlord and informed her Dylan would be covering the remainder. He stormed home, yelling that I should revert to paying 80%, but I refused. I reminded him he'd never appreciated my efforts before, so I was finished helping him. He offered various excuses, but ultimately, he had to pay his share. Throughout this entire ordeal, he never once apologized. He never sat down with me to express regret for his lack of appreciation. His failure to acknowledge my perspective was deeply disappointing. Reflecting now, I regret not recognizing his true character sooner. As anticipated, over the subsequent months, our arguments escalated, with him blaming me for everything and attempting to gaslight me into reverting to my old habits. My promotion at work seemed to be the final straw for Dylan. A mutual friend, also my co-worker, must have informed him, because that night brought the most vicious fight of our relationship. Dylan returned home intoxicated and roused me, demanding to talk. Nursing a bad hangover from celebrating with my friends, I suggested we speak the next day. He persisted, claiming he had something vital to impart. Groggy and irritated, I sat up, hoping to placate him, and asked what was so urgent. That's when Dylan, slurring, began to recount meeting someone at work. I knew the woman. I'd seen her at one of his office parties. Her name was Bella, and she was only years old, the daughter of an industrialist, clearly affluent. Her employment was merely a facade, her father's insistence on work experience. Dylan continued, stating he was falling in love with her because, in his words, she was a real woman, unlike me. I regarded him without emotion. Truthfully, I felt no shock or sorrow, as I perhaps should have. Our relationship was clearly dying, and we were effectively roommates. He droned on about this new connection, but I cut him off mid-sentence. I told Dylan I genuinely didn't care about him seeing someone else and was happy for him. I suggested an amicable breakup, with him vacating our place as soon as possible. Dylan stared, brows furrowed, and asked if I was jealous of this new girl. I smiled and shook my head, informing him I was relieved he'd found someone, as it removed any lingering guilt about ending things. This enraged Dylan, his face reddening. He questioned if my promotion was the source of my newfound confidence. I explained my promotion was irrelevant to our relationship. I'd realized over recent months that we were no longer compatible. I elaborated that we had become more like roommates than romantic partners. Hence, I understood his desire to see someone else. I expected him to be pleased, but instead, he began to yell, expressing his hatred for modern women, like me, who flaunt their careers. According to him, Bella was superior because she only desired marriage and children. Despite his tirade, I remained calm, reminding him that every woman has different aspirations. Bella, from an affluent background, might prioritize her career less than I did, but I cherished mine. I advised him that if he sought a woman like Bella, he should be with her. I urged an end to the argument and told him to move out as soon as possible. His eyes widened, and he demanded to know how I'd manage the rent alone. I explained my salary increase meant I could now afford the entire rent without a roommate. Hearing this, he exploded, accusing me of showing off. He boasted that Bella was richer than me, even owning a house gifted by her father. He continued to rant, insisting I needed to change, to become more complacent. Then he sneered, asserting that, at the end of the day, men want a housewife, not a woman who earns more than them. At this point, I commanded him to be silent. I was exhausted from arguing in the dead of night. I gave him until month's end to move out, and until then, he would sleep on the couch. I could hear his continued grumbling, but I ignored him and returned to sleep. Fortunately, over the next week, Dylan began packing and slowly moving his belongings. I felt a growing excitement at the prospect of finally having the entire place to myself. On his final evening, I arrived home to a shock. Dylan and Bella were seated on our couch. I looked at him quizzically, and he informed me that, being his last night, he wanted to show Bella where he lived. His audacity was incredible, bringing another woman into my home without asking, knowing I'd be back. I didn't want to be rude to Bella, assuming she wasn't at fault, so I greeted her politely. To my surprise, she regarded me with contempt, not even bothering to acknowledge my presence. I decided not to take it personally, and went to freshen up. Later, while I prepared pasta in the kitchen, Bella entered for some water. She stood watching me for a minute, making me uneasy. I asked if she needed something, but she only gave me the same disdainful look. I chose to ignore her, and continued cooking, planning to retreat to my bedroom to eat in peace. After finishing my meal, as I descended the stairs, I overheard Dylan and Bella talking. Bella was remarking to Dylan how fortunate he was to have upgraded after dating someone who looked like me. I froze, hearing Dylan laugh and agree. Bella then inquired why he ever fell for me, and that's when Dylan uttered something that completely shattered me. He confessed he had used me because I was gullible enough to pay for our dates and lend him money during college. He even disclosed that my covering over half the rent for years had allowed him to save a significant sum. I was stunned. I'd always suspected he might have leveraged my generous nature for rent, but never imagined he'd been exploiting me from the very start. Bella and he then continued to dissect our relationship, ridiculing me in every conceivable way. Humiliation threatened to overwhelm me with tears, but I refused to let them see me in that state. I quietly returned upstairs and spent the rest of the night silently weeping into my pillow. The next morning, Dylan and Bella were gone. He had taken his final belongings and officially moved out. Walking through the house in the following days, I knew I was finally free. I cannot adequately describe the lightness I felt, knowing he was gone from my life and this home. I cried tears of joy and danced around the house, then meticulously cleaned the entire place, erasing every trace of him. Over the subsequent weeks, I thoroughly relished living alone. I no longer cared about what Dylan and Bella had said about me. All was well until 2 months later, when our mutual friend at work informed me Dylan was marrying Bella. I was taken aback. It seemed incredibly sudden. Our friend displayed their engagement photos. They appeared very happy. While a faint pang of sadness lingered, knowing how Dylan had used me, I also recognized I'd never have found satisfaction with him anyway. Therefore, I was pleased he had found someone who could make him happy. That same evening, upon returning home, I discovered an unexpected wedding invitation in my mailbox. My eyes widened in shock. It was from Dylan and Bella. I initially suspected a mistake or a mere courtesy invitation, until I opened it and saw something scribbled in the corner. Inside, it read, "I want you to attend my wedding, so you can see the grand life I'm going to have with Bella." It slowly dawned on me that he had invited me solely to gloat about his marriage, his wealthy partner, and his newfound affluence. I took a deep breath, trying to fathom why he would send such an invitation after all I had done for him over the years. The accumulated anger and frustration boiled over, and I knew I had to respond with my own form of retribution. I RSVP'd, yes, with a +1. A plan began to crystallize, and I was determined to make Dylan regret ever inviting me. I opened my laptop and began scrutinizing Bella's social media profiles, examining every single picture she had ever posted. As luck would have it, I found precisely what I was looking for. Just 6 months prior, Bella had broken up with her ex-boyfriend, Jake. Numerous posts featured him, their pictures dating back to high school, indicating a clearly long-term relationship. I sent Jake a friend request. Once accepted, I messaged him. To my surprise, he responded, and we began conversing. I was forthright about being Dylan's ex, and explained my intention to invite him as my +1 to the wedding. He seemed intrigued and curious, but I clarified everything. Over the next few weeks, Jake confided that Bella had repeatedly cheated on him, and her latest infidelity had been with Dylan. This was news to me. I had no idea. He further revealed Bella's consistent preference for older men, so he wasn't particularly surprised when she declared her love for Dylan while they were still together. As expected, Their breakup was bitter, and he had blocked her everywhere, despite her pleas to remain friends. From his tone, it seemed he still harbored feelings for Bella. I also shared my own experiences with Dylan, detailing how he had exploited me for years. I poured out my heart, describing every hardship Dylan had inflicted, and how Bella and he had mocked me. Jake was appalled by Dylan's treatment and comments. After hearing everything, Jake finally consented to accompany me. The thought of my ex and Bella's expressions when they saw me arrive with Jake filled me with anticipation. On the wedding day, as predicted, Dylan's eyes widened when he saw me enter with my special guest. He undoubtedly recognized Jake as Bella's ex. We ignored his reaction and proceeded to find our assigned seats. Dylan approached me, whispering angrily, demanding to know why I was there with Bella's ex. I simply smiled. Unable to cause a scene publicly, he had to begrudgingly return to the aisle, his eyes fixated on me with fury. When it was time for the bride's entrance, everyone rose. Bella looked magnificent in her white floor-length gown as her father escorted her down the aisle. The ceremony proceeded smoothly, and the celebration shifted to the reception area. Bella must have changed, as she wore a different dress upon entering. She hadn't noticed Jake or me until her gaze suddenly fell upon Jake seated beside me. She froze. Bella turned to look at me, then at him, still seemingly confused. She asked Jake what he was doing with me. I smiled and stated I had invited him as a guest to show our support for her marriage. She looked incensed and asked Jake if we were now dating. Jake remained silent, recognizing the absurdity of the question, and Bella's face began to flush crimson with anger. Jake asked if he could speak with her privately, wishing to avoid a scene, and she nodded solemnly, shooting me a venomous glance. They walked out, and I turned to find Dylan watching our interaction with wide, hawk-like eyes. Though concerned, Dylan could do little but remain seated, pretending everything was fine. The party continued, and everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves, but an hour passed, and the bride was nowhere to be found. Several guests began to notice and whisper amongst themselves. Bella's father started to look worried and asked one of the bridesmaids to check on her. A minute later, the bridesmaid rushed back, clutching a note. She announced to everyone that Bella had eloped with her ex-boyfriend. The guests stood in stunned silence. The bridesmaid continued to read the note, in which Bella confessed that seeing Jake had rekindled all her dormant feelings, and she had made a grave error marrying Dylan. This revelation further shocked the guests, leaving Dylan standing there, humiliated and exposed. I, too, was quite taken aback. While my intention in bringing Jake was certainly to provoke Dylan, I never imagined things would unfold this way. Dylan looked as though he was on the verge of erupting. Bella's parents politely asked everyone to leave and profusely apologized for the unfortunate turn of events. I watched as Dylan, once proud and boastful, stood utterly alone, completely blindsided by Bella's decision. Since the wedding, I do feel a touch of remorse, yet simultaneously, I can't help but feel a profound sense of satisfaction that Dylan's attempt to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly.